All right. So we are going to be doing a very practical lesson this evening. And you, of course, have been coming to services and have experienced different things. And you've probably found that certain parts of the service have a natural structure to them. We'll go over them in more detail later, but they are a little bit more obvious. The Shema and the blessings around it. Creation, the idea of the gift of Torah, the gift of redemption. It makes sense. The theme is easy to follow. One simply starts on one page, keeps reading, and allows the different ideas to guide them in their meditations and understanding of God. And then, of course, we hit the Amidah with its components of praising God and celebrating if it's a Shabbat, or asking if it's a weekday, and then finishing off with thankfulness at the end. It's a very neat package, and it makes a lot of sense, even if you haven't been taught much about it. The Torah service, on the other hand, is the section of the service that on an average Shabbat takes up the most time by itself. We usually begin our Torah service at about 10:15 on a regular Shabbat, and we usually finish the Torah service sometime around an hour later, or a little bit longer if it's a longer Torah reading. And obviously, the highlight of the Torah service is the Torah reading, the actual reading from the Torah, from the scroll. However, that's not just a let's read a story to our kids kind of reading. It is set inside a whole framework of psalm quotes, of songs, of different thoughts and phrases to try and give it a structure that isn't just open the book and read, right? It turns it into a service. It turns it into what we call liturgy. Liturgy is when you are reading words and doing a service that has a worship or spiritual connection. It's more than just reading from the book, because someone could read from the Torah and read it just like they were reading Moby Dick, or like they were reading Shakespeare, or they were reading Harry Potter. You can read it like a book, or you can read it like a service. And the Torah service, the elements that go around the reading, are what make sure that we are thinking of this in a spiritual way, not just in a read a book kind of way. Does that make sense? Okay, so understanding what's in the Torah service and what each part does is actually not very easy to do, because there are lots of different pieces that have been added over the last couple thousand years, and that can make it confusing. But I'm going to break it into pieces. We're going to go through. I'll give you examples of how different parts of it sound, because the sound often matters. And then you'll see how it all kind of fits together, I hope. Good? Yes. Good. All right. So first of all, we have a structure, just like everything else in the service. There is a particular outline, a particular structure. You may have noticed that our services are not just free-flowing, impromptu, do whatever you feel like, improvise, ad-lib. There is always room for spontaneous prayer and spontaneous expression, but we have a structure for every part of the service, and we have a structure for the whole service to make sure that it isn't just blah, it isn't just whatever you feel like, that it actually guides you and moves you. I like to compare this to if you are going to a gym and you are just walking into the gym and you're standing in front of all the equipment and you just sit there going, what should I do? Should I do my arms? Should I do my legs? Do I do a treadmill first? Do I do the rowing machine first? Maybe I should do the aerobics class. Is it better to do the free weights before the aerobics, or aerobics before the free? This is what the service does. It's your personal trainer that sets up a whole structure for you so that you get the most spiritual benefit out of this time than if you were just trying to use the equipment randomly, or not even know how to use the equipment. So the service always has a structure. The Torah service has its own internal structure. It begins with a fanfare. We'll explain what that means I'll talk about that in a minute. It has the removal. How we take the Torah out of the ark is a very special act. There's a special framing for that. We have the reading, of course, and then there are additional blessings that we slide in to our Torah service while the Torah is out. And then there is a special ceremony that we do for the return of the Torah to the ark. So we're going to go through each one of those, each in its own turn. Fanfare. So the fanfare is the opening few lines on that page. If you're in the Lev Shalem, it's I think 168 in the Siddur, and you'll notice that the fanfare begins with quotes that are taken from the Bible. One of the, unfortunately, best kept secrets of the Siddur, of the Jewish prayer book, is that 80 to 90%, depending upon how much looseness you have with grammar, are just quotes taken from the Bible. Right? Very little of it is just totally written new by some rabbi somewhere. Most of it are straight quotes, or a quote taken and then maybe a verb tense, from past to future, or a couple of words here and a couple of words there, and they get joined together. But 80 to 90% of the Siddur is either direct or almost direct quotes from different parts of the Bible. So as we are about to take out the Torah, when we have the whole congregation standing there, the ark is still closed, and we are just getting ready, we begin with the phrase, "There is none like you among all the gods, my Lord. There is nothing like your deeds. Your kingdom is a kingdom of all eternity. Your rule is for all generations. Adonai reigns, Adonai reigned, Adonai will reign forever." Now you'll notice those are actually three different quotes taken from different parts of the Bible, but they are put together because it then fits that theme of God's rulership as being eternal, from past, present, and future. There's no one sentence in the Bible that looks like this, but there are those three separate quotes that clearly say that in that way. So it's easy to put them together and make one phrase. And then Adonai gives strength to his people. Adonai will bless his people with peace. Now,
that's the one that says Adonai, Melech, Adonai, Malach, Adonai, Yitmach, right.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So it seems like kind of what are we trying to say with this collection of quotes, of all the quotes from the Bible? Why are we using these? Well, of course, what we're talking about first and foremost is the idea that God is unique. Right? Because in order to appreciate the Torah, we have to appreciate the uniqueness of the author, of the one who gave the Torah. And when we want to appreciate God, we want to appreciate God's deeds. Now, usually when people talk about God's deeds, they will focus on things like the Exodus from Egypt, one of the greatest deeds ever. They'll talk about creation, the first deed ever, and one that everything else needs. But what deed are we talking about here? Well, we are implying, by putting this at the Torah service, that there is this greatness of God's deed of Torah. And what is the greatness of that deed? Because that deed establishes God's kingdom for all time. Right? How is a king a king? What makes a king a king? Right? It's not the crown. It's not the fancy chair. It's not the fancy clothes. What makes a king is that when the king rules, when the king gives orders, when the king gives a law, the country obeys. The country follows it. Right? Imagine a king who's sitting in his room and he is making all sorts of laws, and no one in the country cares. No one in the country is listening to the king. Is that person really a king? I mean, yeah, he's got the clothes, he's got the crown, he's got the fancy room, and he's given laws, but if the people are not listening, then it's almost like that king doesn't exist. And this is what God is trying to say, is that the mark of God's kingship is the gift of Torah, because it is the Torah that tells us that this is how we should live in God's kingdom, in God's world, in God's place. And that means that us paying attention to the Torah is sort of acknowledging God's rulership. And by reminding ourselves that God's rulership is for all generations, that God also was king in the past, that God is king now, and God will continue to be king, is reminding us that the book we're about to read is an eternal book. It is complete. We're not waiting for volume number 2. We're not waiting for the prequels. We're not waiting for the updated version. We have exactly what we need, because the same author, the author of this book, is the same as God was 5,000 years ago and will be the same 5,000 years from now. Right? The author is never changing, and therefore the book is never changing. And that means that God has given us strength, right? And that God has given us a means of peace. Now, does that mean God gives us strength, like steroids to? No, it's because God gave us Torah. That all of this is linked together as one spiritual lesson. That because of God's uniqueness and God's eternal reign, as marked by God's gift of the Torah, which will never change, we have access now to strength, and ultimately to peace. And that is just how we begin the Torah service. And its reason I call it a fanfare is because the way that the music has been put to this is the same type of music that you would have if there was a king. Because so it begins, I'll do my my best rendition. Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai v'ein kema'asecha malchutecha malchut kol olamim umemshaltecha bechol dor v'ador. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai himloch leolam vahed. So hopefully you can hear from that. This is the kind of music you would have if there was a king walking into the room, right? So we are using the same type of music, the same type of melody, dun 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 dun, right? You can almost hear like dun 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 dun, which is what we play when the president comes into a room, right? There's music for the greeting of a sovereign, for the person that is the ruler of this place, and the music for this is reminding us of that. Because if we don't accept the ruler, then why would we accept the rules? Right? If we don't, someone come in?
I don't know.
It's okay. The door's open, right?
Nobody's walking the other way around.
Oh, really?
The door is open, yeah?
The door should be open.
I don't know. He was looking, but didn't come to this. I saw him walking in, but I thought he was going to come to the door.
Okay, well, if you see him come back, let me know.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so the whole structure of this is meant to impress upon us the glory of the author so that we will take the book more seriously when we read it, right? If you respect the ruler, you will respect the rules. And that is why we structure this ceremony to try and really remind people of this. Now, this section of the Torah service is only done when it's a Shabbat, when we have a little more time and where we have this little bit extra where we celebrate God as this sovereign figure. On a weekday, we actually are a little bit more abbreviated. This is the part you'll know when we open up the ark and everybody rises, because we always rise whenever the ark is open. And we say, when the ark would travel, Moses would say, "Rise, Adonai, and let your foes be scattered. Let those who hate you rout before you," meaning run away. Right? For from Zion the Torah comes forth, and the word of Adonai from Jerusalem. Blessed is the one who gave Torah to his people Israel, through his holiness. Now, you'll notice that we're talking about the ark here. Now, that makes perfect sense, you think, because we're opening up the ark, we're talking about the ark, two different arks, right? What was this ark that we're talking about here? This was the Ark of the Covenant. This was the ark that was built at the base of Mount Sinai, that had the tablets of the covenant in it and was carried on the shoulders of the Levites, had the little angels sculpted onto the top. We don't have that ark anymore. Right? That ark was long ago taken and destroyed by our enemies. So why are we talking about it here? Right? Well, I mean, we're standing in front of a totally different kind of ark, but we're remembering the ark that is now gone. He's coming back? Okay. Do you want to just go see if I can hit pause on myself?
Know, it's strange to me because normally he knows we're in the library.
Yeah, or he'll knock on the window, but and I know we had the door open.
I know.
So maybe our security guy shut it.
You never know. So this fanfare is during the week.
Well, this is also on Shabbat.
On Shabbat
Yes,
too.
I'll show you the melody in just a minute, and you'll see how familiar it is.
Okay.
So now
This is like the second time when we have another scroll to read.
No, this is still at the very first page. Yes. So the reason why we're talking about that ark while opening up this ark is because we are trying to say that even though we don't have that ark, we still have that same connection to God. This is a very radical and powerful message that our tradition is giving us by quoting this section from the book of Numbers when we are about to take out the Torah. Because it is telling us, yes, we don't have the Ark of the Covenant, and we don't have the temple itself, the Temple of Jerusalem. And for most of our history, until modern times, we didn't have the country of Israel even. Remember, we live in a time now where there's the miracle of Israel. But even though all of that was true, when we stood and were ready to take out the Torah, it was like we were there at the first time again. It was like we had the ark, we had the temple, we have the country, because we still have God. And we know that God is still able to reach us through the Torah. And so we do this section and we rise. Now, this comes with the opening. Vayahi bin soa ha'aron, vayomer Moshe, Kuma Adonai, ve'afutzu hoivecha, ve'anusu misanecha mipanecha. And then it goes on, Ki mitzion, which you might be more familiar with as well. Now that phrase, right, Kuma Adonai ve'afutzu, right, when God would rise and say, we would say, rise God and scatter your enemy. That verse is going to form the beginning of a quote in the Bible, in the Torah, that we're not going to finish until the very end of the Torah service. All right, so hold that in the back of your mind, that we are beginning a quote, and then we are going to put all of our Torah reading and everything else in the middle, and then we're going to finish the quote at the very end of the Torah service. And this is the way that we think of everything that we are about to do is contained within that original arc, right? This is the fulfillment of the covenant. This is God still leading us. This is God still marching in front of us and protecting us in Torah form, even if not in golden Ark of the Covenant form, right? So this is a way that we still have that connection, even if we lack the box. Now, in most communities, we then do a reading that comes from the Zohar. And it's called Berich Shemeh, because that's the first few words. And most of this page is done privately. When I say privately, I mean most people will read it to themselves, some in the Aramaic and some in the Hebrew. And it says, "Blessed is the name of the Master of the world. Blessed is your crown and your place. May your desire be with your nation, Israel forever. May you show the redemption of your right to your nation in your holy temple. May you fill us with the best of your enlightenment, and may you receive our prayers with mercy." You can see the idea here is that we are preparing ourselves to read Torah, and that means we are really trying to say this is a way of linking our will to God's will so that it will be done and it will be good. May you fill us with the best. We've read that. May it be a pleasing before you to lengthen our lives with good, and I, your servant, shall be remembered together with the righteous ones. Have mercy on me and protect me in all that I have and all that belongs to your nation, Israel. You are the one who nourishes all and provides all with their livelihood. You are the one who controls everything. You have control over kings, and their kingdoms are yours. Remember, we just said in the last page, God was king. Here we're reminding ourselves that God is king over the whole world, but that's especially powerful because we have no king. Right? Our king was killed. Our king was driven away. Our kingdom was taken away from us. But what we're saying here for most of the last 2,000 years is, yeah, but we still have the better king than all of their kings. Their kings may have palaces, their kings may have armies, but our king is God, and that beats palaces and armies any day. It continues by reminding ourselves, I am the servant of the Holy One, blessed be he, as I prostrate myself before him, as I bow before him and before the glory of his Torah at each and every moment. I put not my trust in any man, and I have no faith in the sons of the gods. My trust and faith are only in the God of heaven, who is the true God. So we're trying to remind ourselves that we don't worship angels. We don't worship people who claim to be the children of God. We don't worship any person, right? The only thing that is at the top of our world is God. And everything else, it's either not real or it's just another person. And that doesn't deserve my worship. God's Torah is true. His prophets are true. And he abundantly performs compassion and truth. In him, in God, I trust and I say praises to his holy and precious name. And then we finish usually by singing out loud with the final paragraph. May it be pleasing before you that you shall open my heart with your Torah, and that you give me male sons who shall fulfill your desire. And may you fulfill the requests of my heart and the heart of your entire nation Israel for good, for life, and for peace. Amen. Now this is better known when we sing it. Be anarachetz velishme kadisha Kadisha Yakira Anna Tushbechan. And then we continue to sing, and you can see there's almost this plaintive sound to it. that we are almost begging God, please, but what are we begging for? Open my heart to your Torah. Because if you open my heart to your Torah, then the requests that I have, the prayers that I have, will be good prayers, and they will lead to goodness, and they will lead to peace. But so it works by me opening myself up to your Torah, and then you opening up my heart with the Torah for good things, and then those good things will eventually be what happens. But if I don't, study Torah, if I don't listen to your Torah, if I'm closed to your Torah, then I'm just going to want a new Ferrari, right? I'm just going to want a bunch of, women. I'm going to want, to have more whiskey or whatever. I don't know, right? It's money and stuff. It's if you don't let the Torah influence you, then what you end up wanting in life is usually not very good. And when you get it, it makes your life worse. And when you don't get it, you're unhappy. So this has to fit together by letting yourself be open to the Torah, so the Torah can change what it is you actually think is important in life. And then you can actually then seek to fulfill that in your life. Make sense? So you've noticed this whole buildup is trying to say, when we open this book, it's not just reading a book. Right? When we open this book, we are acknowledging God as King. When we open this book, we are acknowledging that God is still over us and with us, even though we don't have the temple and the ark and the land. And when we open this book, we have to open ourselves too. Right? It's not a magic book, meaning just by reading the Torah, it doesn't make everything better. But by reading the Torah with the right spirit, we can change ourselves. And if you can change yourself, you can change the world. Right? So that's a lot to do in the first few minutes of the Torah service. Now, as I mentioned, Baruch Shemay, this section that we read, is written in Aramaic. There's a couple reasons for that. Well, the most important is because that was the language of the Zohar. The Zohar is one of the most important books in the Kabbalah, the books of mysticism in Jewish tradition. Now, because it comes from that book and not from the earlier sections of Jewish life, it means that there is a lot of variety of how people do it. Some people don't recite it at all. Some people recite it before the Torah is taken out of the ark. Some people recite it while the Torah is still sitting in the ark. Some will recite once the Torah is out. Some will recite it on Shabbat, since where it fits in the Zohar is a Shabbat discussion. And some will not say that phrase, sons of gods, because people thought that implies that such things actually exist. And of course, there is no son of God in a literal sense. And so they omit that to avoid giving any legitimacy to that idea. Okay, finally it comes to the removal, right? All of this has been the preliminary before we even get to take the Torah out of the ark. And the Torah is taken out of the ark. It is handed to whoever is going to be carrying it. That person then stands, in the center of the bima, of the raised platform. And then they lead us in the Shema and the Echad. We'll show you these in just a second, which is followed by a prayer known as Gadlu. We then march around the sanctuary going to the right. It's Jewish custom to begin things to the right. It's considered to be the strong hand. And so that's the way we start. By marching around the sanctuary, the communities that do so are showing that the Torah comes out to the people. Literally, we said the Torah will come out of Zion, and we're sort of living that out by having the Torah come to the people. This is not a book that is only for rabbis. This is not a book only for a few people. This belongs to everyone. Make sense? Okay. So when we do the Shema, the Echad, and the Gadlu lines, the first two lines are said by the leader and then are repeated by the congregation. Now, sometimes people can't help themselves and they join in, but technically you should wait your turn. This goes back, of course, to the days when people didn't have their own books and people would listen for what their job was. They couldn't read along. And so the leader would do the Shema, and then the congregation would repeat the Shema. The leader would then say, Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo, and the congregation would repeat, Echad Eloheinu, and so on. And then the leader alone, usually while turning and bowing towards the ark, will do Gadlu Ladonai Iti, Uneromema Shemo Yachtav, which is technically an order or a request to the congregation. Greatify, I'm trying to think of what the best English word. Make God great along with me. right? Which obviously we're not actually adding to God's greatness. So it's more like, join with me as we proclaim that God is great. You see, Hebrew is a so much more efficient language, right? Wouldn't you say, it's English takes too many words. And then we will celebrate, we will elevate his name together. And then we begin the march. And there's a song that goes along with it, but we don't have time to go into that because, well, we're running out of time. All right. Then we get the Torah reading. Now, you might think the Torah reading is great. The Torah reading is simple. The Torah reading is easy. And the Torah reading is just like your teacher reading out a history book about the American Revolution, or just reading from, World War II, or some other nice historical topic. Or maybe they're just going to read to you from some other book. The Torah reading is incredibly challenging. I don't just mean because it has to be read by people who have practiced, because inside the Torah scroll itself, there are no vowels and there are no marks for the cantillations, for the musical trope. That musical trope, by the way, is there to guide the reading in the correct, well, not just pronunciation, but phrasing, right? Like it's the equivalent in English of having the right commas and having the right periods and colons and hyphens and all of that. And it's telling you which words go together, which words are separated by a pause. It makes the sentence work. The best English example of that, of course, is the old sentence, "Let's eat grandma." Right? You can say that sentence two ways. Let's eat grandma and let's eat grandma. Right? The first sentence, the music of that sentence means, "Hey, grandma, let's go get some food." And the second sentence said, "Hey, everybody, why don't we eat her?" Right? Let's eat grandma and let's eat grandma are two very different sentences with the same words. And the same thing is why we use the trope in the chanting, in order to make sure the words that should go together are together and the words that shouldn't go together stay apart, and that it flows in the proper way. But the main purpose of the Torah reading, of course, is understanding. And that is something that a lot of people still, I think, have trouble figuring out. I mean that they have trouble figuring out what the Torah means, but they have trouble understanding that understanding is difficult. Right? We have this weird, almost delusion in most of our educational systems, where if you just read the book, you'll understand the book. Right? It's all the teacher tells you. Right? Go home, read chapters 1 to 25, and we'll have a test tomorrow. Right? Like, okay, but that's not quite enough. It's not quite enough for a textbook. It's definitely not enough for reading the Torah, right? Because we have this problem. How could a document written in a language that we can understand perfectly contain God's understanding of the universe? Right? Think about that. Whatever the Torah is, it's written in a language that is understandable by human beings. Do you think there is a language that is understandable by human beings that can contain the perfect and infinite wisdom of God? Well, probably not, right? Because we can't understand God completely, right? That's a limitation of our human brain, of our human mind, and even of our human soul. We can't get 100% of an understanding of what God is. I mean, we have the classic example of the story of Job, where as much as Job is struggling with this, God eventually comes to him and says, "You're never going to get it. Now, you can get close, or at least closer, but you're never going to be 100% understanding of me and why I do what I do and how the whole thing works." Right? So that makes it a problem. Why are we listening to this at all? Well, because the Torah does perfectly convey the clearest statement of God's will possible in a human language. Right? So it's not possible for any book or any language to be 100% able to capture God, but God does have a message that he wants us to have, and the Torah is 100% the best version of that message. Right? So it's not that we get to understand all of God through the Torah, because we're human, we can't, but we can at least understand the message that God was wanting to give us, that he gave through the Torah itself. Does that make sense? Okay, but again, only if we read it. However, even then, now that we know what this book is trying to give me, which is not all of God, but God's message, I still have to be a little humble, and I have to realize that this understanding is not simple, it's not self-evident, and it requires a great deal of time and effort by the reader, right? it is easy to make mistakes when trying to grasp the full meaning of the Torah. If you've watched either my Mishnah class or the Torah class for the weekly parasha, you'll know that we will often spend a great deal of time trying to untangle just a few sentences sometimes to see what they actually mean, which is often not what you might have thought they meant when you just read it through like you were trying to read a novel. If you try to read the Torah like you're reading a novel, or even like you're trying to read a textbook, you are going to have problems. And I don't just mean that you won't understand, but worse, you will misunderstand. You will confidently think you understand something, and you will be headed down a dead end. So this is why it takes study. However, that study will help, right? Consistent study, guided by the carefully crafted analysis of the sages and reinforced with vigorous debate, can bring each of us closer and closer to understanding. And that is why we read the Torah each and every week. We read it by ourselves, and we read it as a community. And we try to study the lessons of it, and we try to review. And thank God we live in a time now where you can get more information than ever. Not only because we live in a place with a library like this, but you can actually, go online and get very good resources. If you're not sure if they're good, let me know and I'll double check them for you, because unfortunately there are also lots of really bad resources out there. But there are so many, many good ones. Good? Good. Interestingly, we have a Haftarah. Now, a Haftarah is not the Torah. This is something that you have to look at the Hebrew to tell, right? The word Haftarah, which is the reading we do from the prophets, that is, of course, not in the Torah itself, bears no connection to the word Torah. If you just look at the two words, you can see that there are some major differences between them. Now, in the way that many Ashkenazic people pronounce them, they sound very similar. So you'll hear people talk about the Torah, and you'll hear people talk about the Haftorah, and it sounds like you're saying Haf in front of the word Torah. That's not what the words are. The word for Haftarah is actually connected to the word maftir, which is the concluder reader for the Torah, or the concluder blesser, as that aliyah was added to ensure that the reader of the Haftarah would also show Torah honor. So whoever's going to read from the prophets has to also have a Torah honor, because otherwise it's a little rude. I mean, it's like, imagine you visit a city where two of your friends are living and you only visit one friend. Right, what's the other friend going to think? Or worse, imagine you visit a city where your parents and one of your friends live, and you only visit your friends. Right? Your parents are going to be like, "What? I'm chopped liver? You're going to visit your friend, but you're not going to visit your mom and dad?" Right? It would be insulting. And so, because the prophecies, as wonderful as they are secondary to the Torah, whoever is going to read from the prophecy also has to have that Torah connection. So the person who has the last aliyah has the maftir, because they're about to read the Haftarah. And that's why they'll always line up, if you pay attention to who's getting which job up on the bima. Now, because of that, you end up with this interesting little linkage. You get two blessings for the Torah. You read a blessing you have a blessing before the reading and a blessing after the reading. And for the Haftarah, you have a blessing before, and then you have 4 blessings afterwards. And by blessings, I mean the Baruch Atah phrases. That means 2 + 1 + 4, you have 7 total blessings if you're doing the Haftarah. And 7 in the symbolism of Jewish poetry is always a symbol for perfection. In 7 days the world was created. It's a symbol of complete perfection. And that way you are getting everything together in that little bundle. Now, the main theme of these blessings for the Haftarah is the dependability of God's word as transmitted through the prophets. Now, because of the choice of the Haftarot, and because of the way they line up not only with the theme of the Torah portion, but also with the broader theme of God's support and guidance for our people, this means that there is also a lot of emphasis that is put on the promise of ultimate liberation and redemption. Good? Good. Now, I mentioned, because the Torah is out, and because we're already doing this whole service around it, we also like to layer a few extra blessings in. Now, normally we don't like to put extra blessings on Shabbat that are requests, but we make a few exceptions. And one of the first exceptions that was made is a prayer that's known as Yakum Purkan. In terms of our history of where we find it in books and such, We see it first written down in around the 1100s, but we know that it probably existed much earlier than that, primarily because although it talks about those who support the Torah as its main thrust, it often will talk directly about the leaders and the sages of the Babylonian community, who were really much more in charge hundreds of years before the 1100s. So it's probably was something that was written a good 1,500 years ago at least, but maybe even older than that. But it's basically saying, as long as we're reading from the Torah, a word from our sponsor. Let's talk about the people who make this possible, right? Our wonderful community of both supporters of the community, financial and with their energy, and also the people who are supporting it with their intelligence, the sages, the teachers, the people who make sure that we keep learning. And so Yakum Porkan became an opportunity to say, yes, thank you for the people that make this possible. Like I said, it's in Aramaic. That's why Yakum Porkan doesn't sound very Hebrewish. You'll eventually begin to tell the difference by listening. And the question of why Aramaic? Well, the Tosafot, who were sages in the around the 11 and 1200s, they gave one explanation. They said, well, it's like the Kaddish, right? And the Kaddish is also written in Aramaic. And the angels, they said, the angels don't understand Aramaic. They only understood Hebrew. So this beautiful prayer won't make them jealous of our praises of God, right? Basically, you don't want to get the angels angry, so you praise God in a different thing. Now, it's a nice reminder of the idea that we get to accomplish something that the angels don't, right? Even though the angels obviously give praise to God all the time, we get to choose to give praise to God. And the person that's on autopilot versus the person choosing to do something, the person choosing to do something is obviously the greater praise. But the Tosafot say, not exactly. They argue that the real reason why it is written in Aramaic is because not everybody knew Hebrew. Aramaic was kind of like the English of that generation, which meant lots of people knew English. Not everybody knew Hebrew. And so for certain prayers, they wanted to make sure everyone knew what was being said. And again, people didn't have their own prayer books in their hands. They were only listening to the service. The only way to make sure they knew was to actually say the prayer in a language that the people understood. And so switching to Aramaic made a lot of sense. This is a problem that we shouldn't have anymore, because nowadays everybody in the sanctuary has a copy of the Siddur, and the Siddur is written in the two primary languages of Hebrew and English that are mostly spoken in this country. And of course, you can find translations of the prayer book into just about every other language you could hope. And so you should be able to pray in a language you understand. And you shouldn't have to worry about sitting in the sanctuary and not knowing what's going on, because it should be in a book in your lap telling you what's going on. If you need help finding a translation, I don't think anyone here does, but just let me know. We also add, very commonly in our community and many others, a prayer that is called Avinu Shebashamayim. That's the beginning of the phrase. And this was a prayer that was written by Rabbi Herzog, who was the chief rabbi of Israel. And he had it edited by his good friend, Shai Agnon, who was one of the great secular authors of the early state of Israel. And they wrote this in 1948 for the blessing of the new state of Israel, because they realized, look, we now have a new state. What do we say to God about this new miracle? Right? How do we talk to God about the new state of Israel? Because for so long, all of our prayers were, please God, return us to our land. Please God, allow us to be in our land. Please God, give us peace in our land. And now all of a sudden we have our land. How do we speak to God now that we are in the land of Israel? And so Rabbi Herzog wrote this Avinu Shebashamayim prayer, which talks about the idea that this is a land that is in need of God's guidance, that this is a land in need of God's wisdom, and that this is a land that is in need of God's protection for all of the people who are trying to defend the land of Israel. And those are the primary themes. One of the interesting phrases that Rabbi Herzog used was Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, the first blossoming of our redemption, where he refers to the land, to the state of Israel, as the beginning of the redemption of the world. right? That this is the very first little bud on the plant that you can see that's not got fruit yet, but because of that flower, fruit is now possible. And this is a very important idea, that the state of Israel is the first stirrings of the time when eventually the whole world will be redeemed. Now, we don't know how long it's going to take for the fruit to come. Right? It doesn't mean just because we have the first blossoming that tomorrow, the Messiah is coming, but it does mean you need the flower before you can get the fruit, which means at least it's possible for Mashiach to arrive in the near future. Now, the chief rabbi of England, 2 chief rabbis ago, I believe he was replaced by Rabbi Sachs, Emmanuel Jacobitz. He suggested the words that it should be, may it be added to our prayers. That is to say, may Israel be the first blossoming of our redemption. There were many people who were unsure whether they wanted to claim that Israel was the beginning of redemption or whether Israel could be the beginning of redemption. So that has continued to be a lively debate among rabbis. No one else usually cares, but rabbis do. All right. Now, there was a great phrase, a great incident that happened that's recorded in the Talmud, the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. There's an incident regarding Rabbi Chia the Great and Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, who were walking in the Arbel Valley at dawn, and they saw the burst of the first light. That is to say, when you're out at dawn, I don't know if anybody here has seen dawn lately. Well, you work early. You probably see the sun come up, and you'll know that it's like dark and dark and dark, and then boom, sometimes the light is just like getting there, or sometimes the light seems to be growing. It depends on where you are, of whether it grows slowly or whether it comes all in a rush. So they saw that first beam of light seem to cut out across the sky, and Rabbi Chia the Great said to Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, "My rabbi, such is the redemption of Israel. A bit, as long as it continues, it increases." So his argument was, that is how redemption will come. And remember, this is a great long time ago, 1,500 years or more. And he's basically saying when redemption comes, it's not going to be all at once. There's going to be a bright light and then a continuing increase in light. And it may take time. It may be slow, but it will eventually get there little by little by little by little. So don't expect it to all happen at once. But also once it begins, hopefully we can count on it carrying through. Make sense? Good. So then it's time to put the Torah back. Right? You notice we finished reading the Torah some time ago. We had the Haftarah added on, and then we had the blessings that come after the Haftarah. And you'll also know when you come to our services that we will often include additional blessings, a blessing for this country, a blessing for other aspects of our community, a blessing for peace in general, other readings about the state of Israel, or on special occasions, we'll often have blessings for the soldiers here and abroad, blessings on behalf of those that are suffering through tragedies, natural disasters, wars, or other problems. We use this time as a way of saying the Torah speaks and tells us to act for all of these different things. And these are what has been awakened within us. Remember way back at the beginning when we were talking about the Berich Shemay, we said, open our hearts, God, to your Torah and let our requests be good and be answered for good. Well, now that we've read the Torah, it makes sense that we make those requests and we make them for good, right? So that we're not saying, all right, I just read the Torah for half an hour and the beautiful words of the prophets. So come on, God, how about that Ferrari, right? No, right? That's the whole point is if you've been paying attention to the reading of the Torah, if you've let it do what it's supposed to do, then by the time you're done with the Torah reading, you should be even more motivated to be thinking on behalf of the great things of this world and the great needs of this world and your community. And so that's why we include that. But after all of that is done, it's time to put the Torah away. But just like the king, we don't just say bye and leave. We have to say goodbye with ceremony. And so, of course, we start off with quotes. This time a quote taken from the book of Psalms. Let them praise the name of Adonai, for his name alone is exalted. His glory is above the earth, the heaven. He has lifted up a horn for his people. Now, the whole horn idea gets used a lot in biblical poetry. Most of us aren't around animals enough to know why this is an issue, but the horn was always a symbol of strength and a symbol of salvation. And was seen as being that sharp, strong aspect of an animal to be able to lift its head up, and that horn would come up, and that was a sign of its strength and its endurance. And so that's biblically why it's used in that poetry. And a praise for all his devout, for the children of Israel, a people close to him, hallelujah. And that in Hebrew goes like this. First, the leader makes a request, a demand of the congregation. Yahallelu et Shem Adonai, ki nishkav shemo levado. And then we respond along with the leader. Hodol al eretz v'shamayim vayaren keren leyamo tihila lechol chasidav Livnei Yisrael am kerovo, hallelujah, hallelujah, da, 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 da. And then the Torah procession begins as it is carried around the sanctuary and brought back to the Aron. As we go, we sing Psalm 29. I'm not going to sing that tonight because it will take way too long. And we use Psalm 29 as that mark of the return procession, because it constantly reminds us of the phrase Kol Adonai. And Kol Adonai means the voice of God or the sound of God. Now, God obviously doesn't have like a sound, like, I have sound because I have a body, but God does have a voice. It's called the Torah, right? God has a voice in other ways as well, but this is the voice that we have been able to capture, to put on the page and be able to have access to anytime we want. Right? The other ways that we experience God are not as reliable, not as dependable as the Torah. And so by using this psalm, which talks about Kol Adonai, it reminds us of that. And this is then linked to the revelation at Sinai, where we all heard the voice of God. Psalm 29 also links us to the idea that the voice of God is echoed in the Torah and the world around us. And it also reminds us of the ultimate goal of the Torah, which is at the very end, which is to say, to bring peace. Good? Good. The Torah is then brought up. It is placed into the ark, and when it is put there and it is resting, we come to Numbers 10:36, and we say, and when it was rested, when it was rested, what's the pronoun referring to here? Remember I said we were starting a quote at the very beginning? Right? Huma vayehi bin soa ha'aron vayomer Moshe. And when the ark was lifted, they would say this. When the ark was rested, they would say this, right? So this is the other half of that phrase. When the ark is lifted, Huma Adonai, right? Rise Adonai. And now when it is being returned, this is what we say. And we're going to go into the Hebrew in just a second. But we are finishing off that bookend. So God and the ark have been up and moving for the whole Torah service. And now it is time for them to come to rest. And so this whole Torah service has been our march. Just as our ancestors in the wilderness would follow the ark through the wilderness wherever they needed to settle, wherever they needed to stay, into battle, into whatever the problems were, so too, we have followed the Torah. Now, we haven't physically been walking around following the Torah, but we've been following the Torah by listening to it, by learning from it, by understanding it, and making it a part of our life. And now, that section, the Torah is being put down to rest, and it's just like when the ark used to be put down to rest as well. Makes sense, right? Exactly. And then Radak, the great commentator, pointed out, advance or rise. You are Lord to your resting place. You are a mighty ark. Your priests are clothed in triumph. Your loyal ones sing for joy for the sake of the servant David. Do not reject your anointed one. Radak argues that phrase from Psalm 132 was said by Solomon at the dedication of the temple. Was again we're doing and the temple that was in Jerusalem. And even though we may not have that temple, we do still have this place continue the same work. Good. So usually we'll do this more or less privately. This is, I think, page 184, if you're in the Lev Shalem Siddur. And you'll know the beginning part goes, Uvnu Cho Yomar. And then we continue privately. And unfortunately, because we do it privately, a lot of people don't notice that what we're doing is bringing to conclusion what we began at the very first page of the service. This is a great quote from Malbim. Malbim is another great commentator on the Tanakh, on the Bible. And he said, God chose to rest. Remember, we're talking about this as being a moment of rest, to rest his presence on the house, which was chosen through the merit of David. And after he chose Zion and established his presence there, he once again exerted his providence to maintain the house of David in the merit of the temple. As it says, arise, O Lord, to your resting place. That was our beginning. This is the in phrase here. For the sake of David, your servant, Meshichecha, for your anointed one. This teaches that David's merit caused the divine presence to dwell in the temple. So even as we're putting the Torah down, we're still remembering the merit of David, the merit of the temple is still supporting us even to this day. Good. Sorry if I'm rushing a little bit. I've got a meeting at 7 o'clock that I have to wrap this up before. And then we finish off by saying, first a quote from Proverbs, for I have given you a good teaching, do not forsake my Torah, right? I've given you the Torah, don't ignore it, right? Don't throw it away. This is a good thing. It is a tree of life for those who hold it, and its supporters are praiseworthy. Its ways are pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. And then we finish off with a quote taken from the book of Eicha, from Lamentations. Bring us back to you, Adonai, and we shall return. Renew our days as of old. And again, this is probably more familiar in the Hebrew because that's how we sing it each week. Ki lekach tov natati lachem torati al ta'azovu etz chayim hi lama chazikim ba v'tom cheha mehushar. Sounding familiar? Yes, exactly. And you'll notice when we get to the very last phrase, Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuha Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. The ark is then closed, and there is that left with that sense of longing, that sense of missing that presence of God that we have just had to say goodbye from, or goodbye to. And this is bringing us all the way from the beginning, where we began with this triumphant march of God coming in as the king. Dun, 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 right? This huge fanfare of celebratory, we can imagine the trumpets and the flags and the confetti. And then at the end, we have to say goodbye. And that's reminding us that this whole glorious feeling of being in the court of the king and hearing the rules and having that sense of support and connection and everything that has seemed like it was taken from us, it's as though we're living in it right now. We have to come back to the real world. And we have to look around and we say, but it ain't perfect, right? Yes, what God has given us is beautiful. It is a tree of life. We hold on to it. We don't let go. And it's going to bring us peace. It will bring a pleasant world. Please, God, make it happen soon, right? Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Make our days like new again, like they used to be, right? Ultimate restoration and ultimate redemption. It ends with that final prayer, that final plea to happen at the end of the service. And when that's done, we then go into our Musaf service. Although usually in this congregation, we take a little break there and you get a sermon. Make sense? Okay. Any questions about the Torah service itself? Okay. If you get questions, please ask. And again, the best way to experience it is to come. There's no substitute.